Ah, there we go.
Coming in.
Yep.
We have a disaster. My Orbix was working and now it won't turn on. I think it gave up the ghost. It's my booster. So we're on Verizon's link, but it's been very good. But we'll see.
Yeah, well, that's why I ran
it's
this
like my car.
That's too bad about your booster.
Well, it's like my car. In August, I was like, I really expected all of you devices to last while I lasted. And so maybe it's a good sign that I have to replace that and my phone that's a bit cracked.
Yeah.
You're very professional with your Surefoot ad and everything all tidy and your shirt.
Well, because then
Very
you don't see the
impressed.
mess behind me. Okay, there's a method to my madness.
That's right. That's right. Griff, come and say hello to your auntie.
I think people are already coming in. I guess I started it. So we're live early. So Barbara Heck says hi.
Nice. Hello back.
Guess I didn't set up a weight room. Where's Griff? Oh, you're freezy. Oh, I hope that this is not going to be Bettina froze. Oh, Bettina, come on.
You will probably see him during the time. Am I freezing? Because
Yes.
You're freezing.
Yeah, you're freezing.
I keep pressing. I'm hoping the booster will come back to life, but it was working at 9 o'clock.
Yeah. Does it need a charge or something?
No, I charged it and I flipped it on at 9 o'clock and it was working perfectly. And for some reason, it's black. Done. It's old, it's already 2 years old. It's obsolete. So
yeah, because your video is frozen, but I'm getting your audio. Oh,
we'll have to make do with what we've got. Trust me, in the state I'm in, nobody really needs to see me. I'm being brave. I'm sporting my new slight hairdo. So it's like coming out of the closet, not wearing a hat.
As long as you're warm enough.
Yeah, I discovered why balding men wear hats, because the drip of the rain is just not a happy making thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's really nasty. There's something about the head skin that's super sensitive, and that's just not happening for me.
Well, I'm not surprised. I've always wondered about that, especially in Middle Eastern countries where it's really warm. If they have a bald spot, they would want to keep their head covered.
Yeah, I suppose so. Maybe I should train Griff to go around my neck. Do you remember my grandmother had one of those horrible tatty furs with dangling feet and the head sort of horrible. Why anybody would think that A, it would keep you warm, and B, it's attractive. It just looked mangy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. It would have the little legs dangling down and yes, in the head.
Just hideous. Right.
Well, it seems like we've got your audio at least. We've got some Dorothy Marks from Scotland. Hi, Dorothy. That's great.
And where in Scotland are you from, Dorothy?
So I'll ask her in the chat, Dorothy. Oh, she's from Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire.
We're from Perthshire.
My folks are from Scotland, somewhere between Edinburgh and Glasgow. But I've never been, so I'm thinking about heading up there. In May, I'm going to be going to the UK, so I may go to Scotland and wander around for a bit.
Well, if they released me to go home to England, I'd like to go back and visit family in Scotland. The light there is marvelous. It's silvery, and it's just a very special place to visit. I was thinking of that last week, how much I would like to visit and be in that silvery light. There's something very, I don't know, replenishing for me. Maybe it's genetic, you know, the weight of my ancestors, but there's really something, I guess, atavistic about it for me, as well as very sensitive. It just spawned a lot of creativity, artistry, and I just loved staying there. I've stayed several times, and I can truly say I'm one of the few horse people that went down every lock from the top to the bottom, because my uncle was a famous sailor and he kept diaries of adventures. And my cousin, younger cousin, and I had to open and shut every lock because the two gents, my father and uncle, were the sailors and we were the extra hands. But it was really fun. Great way to see the country.
Wow. Wow, when was that?
Oh, I was 14. You know, you evolve defense tactics from being parental slaves after 16. So it was, I was my father's very amusing toy slave child from 7 to about 16. And then we were kind of done. But I was always the experimental gerbil. So,
So did you spend much time in the UK as a kid?
We went over for a month and a half every summer, and it was a great place. It was like a big piece of land on the Sound, right opposite the Isle of Wight, there were 4 houses and full of cousins, and you just sort of ran wild there. And New Forest ponies galore, because my uncle was in charge of protecting them. And lots of pony club, and just sailing and fun, and tree houses, and then we'd go and visit cousins in Scotland. Then my uncle got a Scottish mini castle, like a turret with an attachment to it. And there it was fun for the first visit, but the lack of central heating, it's very romantic to go into the old stones. It's just not very comfortable.
Yeah. So your father's family has long history, right?
Very long. In fact, we did back, one of my older cousins was an expert in genealogy, and he traced us back to Attila the Hun's second bastard son. And when I told Oliveira that, he was like, well, no wonder you're good at writing. Whatever. But
wow, but that wasn't Attila the Hun from Mongolia?
Well, it went back through a Hungarian prince, and then a Queen of Hungary that was shipwrecked and went on in the train of Saint Margaret, who landed in Scotland. It was a very weird Hungarian to Scotland voyage, and then the line traces down through Queen Annabella Drummond, who married Robert the Bruce III, and gave those fun gold and crimson waves to the British coat of arms.
Oh.
And And then the family split between the ones that stayed with Bonnie Prince Charlie and were exiled in France. And that's my famous ancestor that wrote the treaties of cavalry, that there's one copy at Saumur and one copy that was with the family. And he invented the pas en biais, going across the diagonal, the beginning of a flat half pass. And very famous. And then they went back to Scotland, took a lesser title, and then the family split. The English branch started Drummond Bank, and that's the branch that I was born in. And then the Scottish branch is still there. My cousin was David of Perth, and very, very into sailing and nature and bouncing around, visiting people, just happy-go-lucky. And it gives you the gene that you can drink and not get a hangover, which was very useful for my formation with Oliveira, since he'd drag you all night long to moan and groan about the disaster of the day in his shoulder ends, and you had to drink large brandies. So it's lucky that I didn't get hangovers.
So you were born in the States.
No, I was born in London.
Oh, okay. I guess I had that confused. You have a British passport?
I used to, but in the day when you had to declare for British or American citizenship, and you had to spend 4 consecutive years in America before turning to your majority, and then you took the American passport, you had to give up your British passport. We chose to stay American because of tax reasons. Really, it was not made for any other reason.
It's often why people make decisions, right?
Yeah, but that's why we all sent to high school earlier and later, boarding school in America. That's why. But I don't really remember my life in England. I was too small. I was 3-4 years behind my siblings, and I learned French in French school and with my French stepfather, where my mother remarried and moved us to Paris before I learned English. So I have a much more, my whole memory is about France and that culture. And then at 4, I remember going to see this person called Papa in England. And because nobody had explained to me what the word meant in English, and for me, the word Louis, my stepfather's first name, had become synonymous with father, right? Nobody had explained that was different. He just had the role, and Louis was the word. So I remember coming back from England, going to Louis and saying, who is this person called Papa that we go and visit? And so there was a moment of confusion between the linguistics and the trip, but they were very good friends. In fact, my stepfather had for a time dated my English father's sister. So it was very friendly, and we used to see each other on holidays. And my father was like, no, you explain it to the child. You're much better at it than I would be.
So your parents divorced and your mom remarried and you moved to Paris. And how many years did you grow up in Paris?
I was in Paris full time until 9.
And is that then when you came to the United States?
No, we went to Portugal.
Okay.
Jumping ahead. That's when I lived in Portugal until I was 14. So we went to Portugal several times from the time I was 7 to 9, but my mother started moving when I was 8.5. And that's when we settled completely. We were in a rental for a while, and then we moved to Absada, the little medieval town that Oliveira lived in. So I knew the old school through the time I was 7 to 8, 9. So
When you say old school, he had a school and then he got a new school?
yes, he had a school outside Lisbon, and then things got too unwieldy because they built a main highway right next to his outdoor school. And also they'd had terrific floods that had killed several of the horses. And so when the river Tagus overflowed, and I think it was just time. And when they settled there, that's where my mother built the riding school called the New School, Quinta do Brejo, and then put up a wing of stables for her horses. And then there was a wing of stables for the school horses, and then a little third wing for Oliveira's private horse. So that's how it came about.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, this is
Of
really interesting.
this hidden secret life. I used to ride in France a great deal. I started riding in America, the Western ponies, shooting ponies. And
That at Uncle Bobby's?
yeah, no, well, Uncle Bobby took a part of my grandmother's land when she died. So it was more Uncle Bobby rode at Granny's. But yeah, the marsh tackies, that's how I ended up with Cricket for him, the last shooting pony.
He was
I
cool.
won't explain that my vet almost drove himself into a ditch when he drove in, and I was complete with the poncho, the gun on my hip, the saddlebags, the whole 9 yards. And he was like looking at me, and he almost drove into the ditch. He's like, "What are you doing? Oh, strange dressage person." So, and then when I got to, it was good formation. I started at 2.5, and then in England we did the gymkhanas and all that stuff. And I had enough of a seat that when I got to the polo club in Paris, there was a very good polo player called Jacques Macaire, and his sons were 10 role players. And he used to ride his horses right up to the double bridle. And so I did my first shoulder in on a polo pony there when I was about 5 or 6, 5. And then he found out that I was pretty reckless outside from the shooting ponies. And then I dodged a couple of his ponies through the woods to make them agile. They used to put protections on your knees and then you just dodge around at warp speed, which was my idea of fun. My sister went into the dressage hunt seat stuff and was tortured by the French military about leg position and everything. And I felt nothing but pity and superiority when I used to watch her lessons. I was like, this dressage stuff, it doesn't look fun. So when I went to Portugal, Swan taught me my first lessons on a vaulting horse. And I told you the story that we rode without a saddle and with just a yoke and putting the hands on it. And he was like, oh, the kid can sit through changes of balance. And he remembered that. And a few years later, when they needed someone to back horses because Juan had lost his nerve, he didn't want to do it anymore. He's like, hey, let's use the kid. So that's how I got my opening door with the Oliveiras, was really through being, agile and sticking to it without gripping. Gripping was the thing that they just didn't want to see. So, I learned to jump with long stirrups, which helped.
So how old were you when they decided to turn you into the test dummy?
The crash test dummy, I was 8 when I visited, and Juan thought it was useful. And then 9 to 10, I started doing a little bit post break-in. And it was really because we'd gotten into terrible trouble, Juan and I, but for shooting some sugar at the groom. who got mad with my catapult. So the guy was so mad, he went past Mr. Oliveira's, we were up top in the outdoor ring, he went past Mr. Oliveira, who was ringing the bell for a horse change, you know, really mad, waving his hands around. And we were okay. And then we heard gallop, gallop, gallop. And Swan said, get on the horse. So I popped on the youngster. And he said, canter across the diagonal. When you get to X, throw your outside leg back and I'll coach you. So when Mr. Oliveira galloped up with his eyes all bulgy, like, what happened? What happened to the grum? And what's going on? You know, he was completely innocent. He said, oh, nothing. Bettina's just helping me with the flying changes, and she could be useful with the young horses. So Oliveira's looking, and he completely forgot about the whole business with the groom. And he said, oh, well, that's good, excellent. And then I got on the horses on the lunge line, the next lot of young horses, and stayed breaking in until I left Oliveira's when I was in my early 20s. So I used to do a lot, you know. Oh, well, when I was living there, it was pretty constant. There was 4 per season, sometimes 5, if clients brought them in. So, you know, 4 seasons a year, 5 horses. It was a lot, in and out. And it was, and a lot of it was kind of scary fun because they were never handled. So, you know, you just go and pick them, ride a horse, the Campino horse, and you go into and spend the whole day, yearlings, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and pick them out, and they would trot them out, and you'd say, yeah, well, this one, that one, that one, and the clients would pick, and then they would suddenly arrive, and then the next day you had to put them in the indoor. They'd never had a halter on, and by 2 weeks later you were cantering. It was quite amazing, quite amazing. So to feel the lack of mental and physical balance, the horse, like, where am I? What's going on? Who are these people? What's this on my head? And then, you know, you had to be very quiet to not bother the horse. That was my use. Mr. Oliveira used to say to me, Bettina, you can get on this horse and I'll work in between the whips because you don't bother the horse. She'd look at my mother and say, Bettina, she doesn't bother the horse.
So you were basically a weight on their back.
Well, I had very long arms and fingers and legs, and not much upper body. So I had no leverage, so I couldn't bother the horse, and no authority, because I was flotsam. I did what I was told. But I had the length of leg and arm to take the right positions of an adult. So it was very useful.
You know, that brings up the point about rider body type, and that short torso, long limbs is definitely an advantage. It doesn't mean other people can't ride, but it's definitely an advantage to just being able to
well, it is to passenger, but you know, I was grateful, particularly when Oliveira started cracking lunge whips behind collected horses, that my torso grew and my shoulders broadened, because I was like, okay, the launch is imminent. Try it, but you know, you have to at least have the notion that when you're small and young, you don't fight with your back. You don't try to stay in the saddle. You're just pulled along. You're a bit like a cartoon. You know how when the cartoons, the back goes, but the heads and shoulders stay? You're a little like that, particularly when you have someone cracking a whip and you have no idea what you're supposed to feel or what the horse is going to do. That's how I learned as above the ground. Oliveira put me on the Balatad horse, said piaf, half pirouette, shut the fingers, crack the whip, off we went. And he did that to everybody. And I'm the only one that stayed in the saddle. So I was the designated driver of that particular maneuver. Everybody else landed very painfully on the horse's neck or on the floor. And Oliveira looked disappointed when that happened, and people screamed and cried. It was, so I was like, I'm sure that that's not really the way you're supposed to teach it, but just zip it. Just, my mother was so relieved when because she had to do it side saddle, and she was a gutsy jumper, but she hated it with Babatad. So that's how I ended up with the secondary job of being trotted out for the wee moment. I liked it.
I'm sure.
My mother used to say my eyes shone, but it was because my body was long enough and trained enough to just go with it until I learned to manipulate it myself. But yeah, part of it is allowing the horse and the balance of the horse to, the French word is entraîner. The horse takes your seat along for the ride.
So, all right. So you're in Portugal, you're 8 years old, 9 years old. And did you live full time in Portugal at that point?
Yes, that's when we transitioned to living full time. I still went to England. I didn't go to France anymore. And that was a bit of a shock for me to go from Paris to a medieval village with no running water, no electricity, and no telephone. I mean, I was like, what happened here? Because I went to my grandmother's for a holiday and came back to Portugal. And I was like, really? So it was so medieval that we had to bump to get to school on the road that was just appalling. Destroyed in 3 years, 3 cars. Um, and I used to drive an hour and 15 minutes to Lisbon to get to school and then back, and then trot
Every
down
day
to
you
the,
went to Lisbon to school for an hour, and
yep, and then trot down to the school when I got back. And then I had some time to do homework. And if the adults wanted to go out to dinner, to talk about endlessly about horse theory and methods, I was dragged along. That was the most miserable part for me, is being dragged along to these endless dinners. And I'd go and finish my homework, sitting in the back of the car, and then try to curl up and sleep. And then they'd come out at 2 o'clock in the morning. And to this day, if someone wakes me at 1 or 2 in the morning, I'm like so growly. It makes the dog seem like nothing. But it was part of the life. Everybody had a drink after the thing, and then everybody got changed, piled into cars, or didn't get changed if it was late, and we all went to have these dinners. It was fun in retrospect because it was a camaraderie. It was, this sort of commune feeling of people that had the same interests and and could talk and argue and eat and enjoy it. It was really bonding. I mean, I made friendships even young with other students that were much older because of that. But the semantics of it is that I hated being cold in the car at 2 a.m. and then having to go to school again at 6 a.m. With very little sleep. So it was very conditioning for the career that I chose, to tell you the truth.
well, I love to talk to my guests about their childhood because it's and what's happened, because it's so much has to do with where they are today. And so this is fascinating. This is a part of you that I didn't know about, and it makes me want to, like, how many people would be at these dinners? How many people would be at the school at any given time? Because people were coming and going, right?
Yeah, in the beginning, there weren't as many. It was more controlled, quality controlled, because the horses were finite in their efforts. Usually you had 2 or 3 very serious people that would come for 2 years, or people who would come repeatedly during a 2-3 year period. Some people would stay there, like Dominique Barbier stayed for 2 years with his 2 horses. It would depend on how they'd study. Generally, in the winter, it was about 8 people to 10 people, and then it would, when the weather got nice, it would sort of explode. Like I said, the expansion was a bit later, where they had 2 lessons, one in English, one in French, twice a day and, more horses, but there were never, I think, enough horses to really rest them. It was tough when you fixed up the school horses behind the efforts during the high season, where there was a constant flow of people coming and going. It was tough on the horses. They
How
were
many school horses were
amazing.
there roughly at any given time?
In the beginning, they were about 8, and then they became 12 to 15 at times.
And so
And
that
it's
that
hard to,
was the pictures of the group lessons that I've seen, the video of the group lessons.
and in the winter, it was about 3, sometimes 4. I mean, the winter were the best time to study, actually, because the horses were rested and you had time to ask questions. And they would ask the better riders, if they came then, to move the school horses up in the lessons. So you learnt the training methodology. While if you came just for the lessons, you were much more in the amateur mode, where you just wanted to have a horse set in the double bridle and go through the maneuvers, much like a test. And I often wondered how much people really learnt there, because, if the horses were so good and they were so set between the front and the back, so to speak, the leg and the hand, that they would do everything, but if you sat twisted and pulled the head sideways, they would do it like that. And then the next person would, if they were better, would straighten it up. And, and then there was a moment of crisis where if the horse started defending themselves, the horse would be put in the back of the lesson, and Swan and I would either fix it, or if there was a working pupil. At the time, it was Danny Pevsner. At my time, it was huge success in England as an Alexander technician. He taught
I
Dr.
didn't
Van
realize
Schenk.
that he rode with Oliveira's, that he was at Oliveira.
Yes, he lasted about a year and a half, and unfortunately, it was my riding accident that polished him off. He went to the Spanish riding school afterwards. I always felt a bit guilty about that.
Why did that move him on?
Well, I'll try and condense it. Again, it was the time where Swan, before he went to Spain, he didn't want to ride the young horses anymore. And there was a 5-year-old called Inquieto, which means warrior, which already is not a good sign. And he hadn't been exposed to the other stallions and in the lesson. And that was sort of my upgrade, that I started riding the younger stallions. And that was when I was 9, coming on 10. So, and that was a little bit more hairy for me, because you didn't know which way they would react. Anyhow, he got through the beginning, but he'd gotten a bit woofed by the stallions around him in the walk trot session. And when the canter came around, they had me go first. And when he went round the other ones, he just caught sight of them, and he did a huge jump in the air with a twist and double barreled. And I went straight over his head, flipped, and hit the wall and slid down. And, Juan grabs the horse, starts correcting him, which I think he should have done first in hand around the other horses. And then I remember Mr. Oliveira's feet coming up after Danny came up and like, you got to get to the hospital. And Oliveira's like, no, don't say anything, don't cry, get back on the horse. Very old fashioned. So I remember Oliveira's big feet and Danny being adorable and really, I think he must have been 18, 19, a bit panic stricken. And I was in a lot of pain after that. But I got, after that, meaning several months after that. But I got back on, did my thing, and I had actually broken the base of my back. And if you remember, when you treated me on my hand, I suddenly had these big tears well up my left hand, and I remembered that my left hand had actually hit before my back hit. So that was a big thing for me. And Danny couldn't stand it. He was like, this is a child that should go to the hospital. And he was just, that was a lot for him. He was very empathetic human being. And that was just not right. But that's the way
But that
things.
was very much the way of the day, right? That you
Yeah,
couldn't.
that's part of it. Can you also buckle up? Those people, those high grade professionals of any caliber, they're not going to waste time on you if you can't, dig down and do it. But I have to say, after that, I went up from flotsam in their eyes to useful. So I gained, I gained ground. But it's that injury cost me a lot in my career from not being treated, obviously. And it was okay. I didn't think about it until it blew up on me in my 20s. I just lived around it. So those were moments where you recognize that Swan did it for years before I came down the pike. And, you take the hits and you learn to respect also the mood of the horse. And I also learned to say, I don't think so. This doesn't feel right. The horse is just too edgy. And Oliveira, to his great credit, recognized that I did have a good instinct for that. And so it became fun. I could give feedback. And then I felt safe as a house. Was wrong with a lunge whip? He could run on his short legs like a water beetle. And he had the worst sounding "I caval." And the horse was like, what's going on back there? And Mr. Oliveira smoking his cigarette, but with one arm anchoring down the capstan, without even thinking about it. You were safe as a house there. Even the horse would throw itself on the ground or, throw itself on your leg and wall. You felt safe because they would get you out of trouble. And that was a super feeling. And it was great teamwork. You felt like you were getting places inside the horse and inside the horse's body. And you'd get occasional, crumbs of explanation. And then I started asking questions because I was bored with being flotsam or useful. And everybody was like, "Quoi?" She's opening her mouth. And then I was like, "Yeah, I didn't ask to be up here, so you better explain to me why I'm doing this." And Oliveira thought that was kind of cute. So he would occasionally volunteer. But João was the best. He'd remember that. And when the horse had to turn in the lessons and the back of the lessons to get some mileage, he'd come up, he'd grab my leg, and he was the one that would say, don't give up, get into the position deeper and come on, get in there. And then he would explain why it related to whatever it was that I was asking questions.
How old were you when you started asking questions?
Oh, right then, and after that accident, it was like 9 or 10. And I was a bit resentful at all the, including my mother, at all the adults sitting around watching my body get smashed through the air and smashed on the ground and not saying anything. So I was like, okay, self-defense, self-preservation. And also simply, who are these people who worship this way of riding and worship this balance and are so good at it? And what does it mean? Because I didn't ask to do it. I just wanted to know why and how it worked more and more. Then it became fun. But, it's not fun to just do it and be flotsam.
Right, right.
Boring.
And Oliveira had a library as well, right?
Yeah, a really fantastic big one with very old first editions. And often he would be frustrated about something that wasn't cobbling together right, and go into his library at lunchtime and turn around like a big bear and sit. And then you'd come back up after lunch and he'd say, "Bettina, come in." And he'd be there smoking away with a book sitting next to him. And he said, I think I figured it out. I think I've thought about it. Or else sometimes it would torment him during the night and he would turn around in his bathroom and meditate. Why the bathroom? I've never known, but that's where he meditated. And he grabbed my arm, arrive and say, "Come on, let's ride. I've thought it through, and this book and this part, I'm going to work on that." And it's the first time where I saw really someone dedicated to put feel into its perspective, not just apply a blind theory or method, or just waft around in a cloud of feel. That there was certain techniques that could translate the feel that you weren't getting through into a methodology that the horse would accept. And I think that library represented that. I didn't start reading because Oliveira would transmit a bit until 16, 17, when Colonel Paolo Angioni, the Olympic gold medalist in Tokyo for the event team in Italy, he's from Sardinia, fantastic gentleman rider, fantastic feel, and really intellectual. And he grabbed my arm and really like intense. And he looked at me and flipped me into his look, and really intent. And he said, "It really drives me crazy that I look at your teacher and I can't figure out how he's doing this. I can't see it. And then I see you and you can do it. And you can't tell me how you do it. And it really annoys me." And I was like, oh, okay, crazy person, let's not agitate it. I was really, really a little bit like, whoa, And he dragged me into the door of the library. It was his Oliveira's sanctum. He said, "You see all these books? I want you to read every one of them, and so that you can explain what you do to me." And that summer, when I went to Saumur as Mr. Oliveira's display rider, I had another experience like that with Colonel then General Durand, who was the head of Saumur at the time, and fantastic Grand Prix show jumper and all this stuff. And he said to me, "It just drives me crazy that Oliveira cannot explain how he does it. He'll explain what we're not doing, but not how he does it." And he said, "Can you explain this to me?" I was like, okay, another crazy person. So I went to the books and I explained what I could when I could. That's actually how I became a teacher. I started at a very high level of teaching, but I would then say to Oliveira when I was riding his personal horses, in this diagonal, when you do this, that's Steinbrecht's shoulder in the canter. And he would look at me a little bit like I was crazy and blink and say, "Yes, of course." So he wasn't a transmitter of books to you until you asked the right question, because that meant that the feel, you had absorbed the feel, you had absorbed the method in the books, and then as you did the training progression in the techniques, you could pinpoint, this comes from this, and you've graphed it here, rather than saying, "How do I do this?" And that was a bit tough on the professionals that didn't read, or the professionals that came from another tradition and thought that they were just going to get to fix up their Piaff, or get more collections somehow.
So
That makes sense.
the books in his library, I assume they were in Portuguese, and then of course you would read the material that's in. No,
No, there was some in Portuguese, and obviously being at school, I learned Portuguese. A few, but they were mostly in French. It's all French.
and many of those have never been translated into English, right?
Absolutely, it's the dominion of the French. It's just like, why should we give you our texts and our history, when you, frankly, they're right, because the nuances of French refine it so much, so much. That you have to take 3 sentences in English to explain what 2 words and variations of 2 words mean. So even the translations, and there's some good little ones, don't give you the little details that reading in French. I don't think I would have gotten as far with Mr. Oliveira as a professional if I hadn't been completely fluent in French and interested.
Was your first
in
language, so that was that. And he spoke Portuguese and French. But did he speak English as well?
Yep.
Okay.
In the beginning, it was a bit pidgin English, or translated English, which was actually fun. You know, when you make a literal translation of Portuguese into English, there are some things that are amusing. But he became very proficient after the clinics in America.
Right, yeah, sure. So, okay, so you're living in Portugal, you're not getting a lot of sleep. There's a whole bunch of people going out to dinner every night talking about theory. So there was the conversations about theory and methodology, but that was all occurring in the evenings. And then the riding would happen you'd probably come back from school and get on a horse, but there was riding going on during the day.
Yeah, and in the weekend, it was riding all day. I was on deck most of the day as flotsam. And also when I started riding in cadence, you know, when at 12, there were sometimes demos that had to be done, and I sometimes had to lead the lesson because the first horse gives the cadence that is required. It sort of calms everybody down behind, and you had to have a certain seat and balance because they would ape you sometimes subconsciously from behind. So I started doing more and more of that during the weekends. And then on holidays, I started having to do more of the holiday time, particularly the school holidays in the beginning of the year. I wouldn't travel. And so then we would do more intensive stuff. And then Joan went away to work in Spain for a while. And so I had more of this lunge line holding at times just for the lunging. And then I was Oliveira's lunge whip person. I learned more about timing and bending the leg and backing off to not go further than the contact, but just bridge over the bit on the ground during those sessions. And in the beginning, Oliveira would grab my hand and use me like a lunge whip. You know, my arm was the handle, and it was actually loads of fun. It was like centrifugal force. So I was delighted. I was like, wee! And then and I had a good run. So it was very, and then the half halt was fantastic to learn it on the ground because you actually had to half halt and stay within the parameters of the lunge whip and sort of fade out and come back in so that you learn to pace yourself and distance yourself. And again, watching the moment where the horse would start looking either back at you with the ear sideways at the hand, and then you knew that the horse was ready to ride because we balanced between the leg and the hand and the tail and the hand. And that to me taught me what I was just riding from when I got on a young horse after Joan, or I got on an older horse, client's horse after Mr. Oliveira. I learned why my leg was there in that, and why the bend was there. How you had to release at the time where the leg pressure. I suddenly visually and from in a visceral way, from being the leg to the hand, understood how the horse felt and how the horse was. So that I think is one of the best. I think you have to learn from example there. This is not just books that you can learn it, and you have to feel that timing, feel that distance. And I've used it a lot with my students, as you know.
Well, I remember your in-hand videos very clearly, and how you work through that process in hand on those videos, which is they're still available, hopefully.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was just thinking that I've got to get my act together and finish the second set that's been sitting around for God knows how long, and then get those reinitiated. But it is available in a download on the French website. They are available.
Okay, so when did you do your first exhibition with Mr. Oliveira?
Well, they were mostly private. At 12 is the one that I remember the most. I had already started, being the monkey. I call myself the monkey, the one with the cymbals, where you get trotted out. Hello, got a little hat. Doo, doo, doo. So I didn't take it very seriously, but Mr. Oliveira was fun to do it with, because he'd come up and he'd sort of grab your leg and he'd say, this guy has trouble with his pirouettes, so we're going to show him really good pirouettes. So it became a bit of a game. And say, no, don't make a mistake. I'd say, yes, Mr. Oliveira. And he'd have me start around his feet and eventually on my own. And so I started doing bits and pieces like that. And then 12, there was a visiting group of Portuguese trainers. And Mr. Oliveira was always at his best then. He wanted to impress the people that he taught, or people that were fellow trainers or breeders. And so then we put our best bib on, and that was the first time he actually put a piece of music on and commanded me under the music. And that was fun. So,
And I'm sure you impressed them.
Oh, I think it was cute for them to see, a 12-year-old do stuff that people struggle with, But the horse was well trained and my body was well trained, and we just did it together. And I didn't feel any pressure when Mr. Oliveira was like, don't make one mistake. I just felt pride in being representing the school of thought. And I already recognized that there was something super special about what I was learning. And the horse was so professional. I didn't argue with Mr. Oliveira. I didn't argue with what was inside the head of his horses that were presented, and particularly two of them. One of them was very refined, and one of them had a head like a steel trap, and that was the one that I did most of the demos on. And there was no question in my mind that the horse knew what he was doing, and he approved of me as long as I was into it, and I knew what I was doing, which was following and guiding and helping out a little bit, but not too much, because he knew what he was doing. The horses really had educated minds beyond what is normal for a horse. There was no sense of panic and pressure. There was only a sense of, I know what I'm supposed to do next, and I know where the open door and the aids are to get there. And, if I got left behind, he's like, are you coming, kid? And, yeah, I'm sorry about that. And so I learned to just be on the spot. And I never had a doubt, because the horses were in such good balance that these things would come out. Some of them I didn't even know the name of at that time. Mr. Oliveira sometimes forgot that. It was like when I did my first display for television, it was a Portuguese TV, and halfway through, Mr. Oliveira looks at me and says in French, are you understanding what I'm saying? I'm like, yes, I do speak Portuguese and I do understand it. But we'd already gone halfway through the whole display. It was just so funny. So we had some fun times with that. And sometimes he would actually take me aside and say, I really don't like this person, so let's just go over the top. But that was really fun. Then he would do crazy changes of dynamics. transitions that you wouldn't even think of. And then that was fun. And then there was the let her rip moment with all the power. And I'm like, yeah, it was like, you know, being in a drag racer and then a Formula One car. It was like, well, let's do it. I really couldn't have cared if I'd crashed and burned. It was so much fun. So that was a great way to learn not to feel pressure as the elevation of training mounted. And I, God bless him, you know, I don't think I've ever had an ounce of nerves presenting horses because of that. Because you're presenting not you, you're presenting the unquestioning joining of you and the horse, which is why I only presented horses that I really had that mindset and the mileage and the time between us. And then you're just there for the people to enjoy seeing the horse and the music. And then it becomes easy to interpret the music.
It makes me think of your Streb performance.
Well, that was also limited by space.
But I think it was amazing.
But it was the only way I could get that horse out of surly. I don't like people. I'm burnt out on showing. I don't want to do anything. And when we went into the studio 2 weeks before, and we only had half a track, she had all her machines for the Olympics in London. And the horse was so like, what is going on? And not in a panicky way. He was like, there's no plastic railings. There's no cranky rider wanting me to do stuff. What is going on? And then his eyes just gleamed and he was just like, okay. And I felt him reach back to me like those horses I rode for Oliveira reached back to you. And my personal horses, he was there. He was like, this is just outrageous. 100% I'm here. So 2 weeks later, I took the horse. He'd only been here 6 months. And he was like, we're here, we're doing this. And I tested a few things. I did a array of the bank of lights because I'm not stupid. And he didn't like the blue light. I said, no blue light.
Oh, interesting.
You never know with horses. So when you're in those circumstances, you do have to be a bit more extra careful.
Yeah, for sure. For people who haven't seen it, Bettina went into New York City and did a performance around the dinner tables with people sitting at them. That piece of film is available.
Well, it was the sides that were interesting because they were steel beams on one side and the ground was wood with steel reinforcement. So there was no give. You couldn't get the pastern to come back up if you didn't do it manually. So to passage and flying change and canter was actually a challenge. And I'm glad I went there ahead of schedule. Oliveira would have arrived with nothing prepared. Like everything's cool. He was a maniac with that. It drove us absolutely berserk. Swan, myself, and people like Jean Boisseau that were there at his demos. You know, at Saumur, we were like, please get on this horse before you come in. And he never would. Everything was done at the last minute. And then all of a sudden he was like, yipe, but he would pull his talent and his back out at the, you know, a last extremis, and then something magic came out. I mean, you know, obviously that's why he was the master. It was extraordinary to see, but it would have been much easier on him and the horse if he'd done 3 days at least before, just tested it. So, you know, when I became his professional monkey, I'm like, can I get the horse a little fit? Can I do this? And can I get him used to the speakers? And Oliveira was like, yeah, whatever, do whatever you want. Useless female thing, but go and do it. So I would quietly do that. Like I would start giving the shampoos and, you know, being like, well, we have to sort this mane out because we have to plait it. And then Oliveira would say on the day off, he's like, oh, it's beautiful. The horse is beautiful. He loved it. You know, you never go down in the stables and see if it was done. So, you know, but if it was done, he just adored it. Just loved seeing that. Go figure.
So you were kind of like the groom for his performance horses then, when they were going out to do exhibitions and things?
Well, you did what you needed to do. I'm like, my mother had a strong hunt seat equitation background, and she had a professional groom on both sides of the Atlantic, and I learned a lot from both of them. And I didn't. Again, it was part of the pride that Oliveira and his son inculcated in me, that I wanted people to see the horses at their best, that they looked glorious, that they were, they had that shine to them, as well as the work. And the work was so overwhelming that they could have been encrusted in mud and half bald, and you wouldn't really notice it. But I don't know. That's the horsemanship part that I took much more from the American side and the British Horse Society side. God forbid that we would ride gymkhana with dirty ponies. It just doesn't happen.
So if somebody's asking if there's truth to the story that some world experts asked him to show them something really difficult, whereupon he said, "I shall walk in a straight line."
Yes.
Tell us that story.
I don't have the story. I just heard the story. There's always someone, usually French, that has to ask something incredibly impertinent. But that was a time where he'd gotten his knickers in a twist, because someone who shall remain nameless, that was very high up at Saumur, had criticized certain things. And so, to put them in their place, he basically said the truest thing that you can say: to leave the horse alone and to have a beautiful collected walk on the straight line is the hardest thing, and the hardest thing to come back to. The other side of the story is that he gassed up the horse at full tilt and then came back and did the walk.
Yeah.
That's how brilliant he was. That's how brilliant he was. But yeah, he liked to put, there was a moment of, now you're just being impertinent, so now I'm just put you down.
Yeah.
And that was fun. I saw a lot of that, and that was fun too. The old thing, he carried grudges, certainly, on that. Didn't like that. And he never forgot a criticism where, if he was honest and showed a moment of training, and then someone backstabbed him with criticism that way, oh, well, that wasn't good. When he was really honest, he would say, "Yeah, this horse has come to me and it's not very good at this, and I'll show you how I ride it." And I always thought that was very false. And it was always someone French. Always. I actually had one of the, for my mother even, scariest rides of my life and hardest physical rides of my life, because of a stupid Frenchman like that, who came up to Mr. Oliveira and said, "Well, it's all well and good, all of this, but it's equitation for the ladies, équitation des dames." They called him the écuyer of the ladies. And Oliveira just, he didn't explode like he would Portuguese style, but every muscle I saw on him knotted. Even his eyes knotted. His eyebrows went up and his eyes knotted, and he was just like, "I could strangle you right here, but I can't." and he said, "Bettina, go and get Levant, the biggest, most powerful he has above the ground horse." Okay. Paddle down, got Levant, and he said, "Hurry up." So I galloped up the top of the hill, coming to the outdoor school. And so everybody's wondering, my mother's there, everybody's there. It was lesson time, no lesson. And I come in solo. Oliver shuts the eucalyptus bars, and it was eucalyptus bars, cliff, indoor ring roof on one side. So you're like, okay, no slippage to that side. And I was standing around, and the horse was a little bit like, "Are we getting going?" So he was at the ready. And Oliveira says, "Canter, no warm up." I start cantering. And as I turn off the center line, he yells, "Galop!" And I let the horse out like a medium canter, and he said, "No, galop!" And then I put the spurs back, and the horse jet propulsed, trained by Oliveira, obviously the canter in place to jet propulsion without putting any weight in the bridle. And it was just so amazing. I mean, there was no sense of tripping or falling or anything else. And so we're whizzing around at top speed. And I heard Oliveira say, "Bettina, jump off the horse." So I jumped off the horse. It's like, what? So as I'm hitting the ground and whatever, I roll, he grabs the horse, he says, "Get up here," throws me back on the horse. So we do this and faster until the horse is like sweaty. I am covered in blood. I am just bruised beyond bruised for like 20 minutes. And finally the French dude said, "Stop. I apologize. Stop." That's how seriously he took insults. He thanked me.
Survived it.
I was like this little black ragamuffin. I'm like, I have no strength left. I'm bleeding. The horse is like sweating like I've rarely seen a horse sweat. And the horse kept being like, "What are you doing on the ground? I didn't drop you." It was like we were both completely like jarred out of our norm, and that was Oliveira. That was susceptible, susceptible as an artist, susceptible as a horseman, and that was real. I mean, it was real. You looked at that and said, "You've insulted this guy who has put dynamite in horses and has wowed the crowned heads of Europe, and you said he's the rider that teaches ladies, you know." So he's like, "Good, I'll show you how brave my ladies are." You have to be brave. And you wouldn't have not done it. It never occurred to me to say no. Because
How old were you at that point?
I was 11.
Well,
Yeah, but I could roll. I could bounce.
apparently.
They were right. No, but that was one of the toughest moments. And I sort of knew why. I understood much better. Oliveira explained it to me afterwards. But it was really interesting to see the guy suddenly go, "What did I say? Why did I open my mouth?" Consequences of your words.
Yeah.
That too is part of method, teaching method. Because if you stop your learning process and you ask too many questions before you understand where your body is supposed to go and where the horse is supposed to go, you will not understand the root of the method, because you won't have that feel. And that's what was so special about Oliveira, is he taught through feel. If you were capable of doing that, and I don't mean to the extremes that he took his favorite or people he formed as children. That was an extreme, because we had to be useful for him and his writing. But for the integrity of the people who wanted to learn, at least the top layer of what he had, and maybe the next layer, you had to be able to feel and then put those pieces together. And I think he was right, because without that feel, why are you up there? And things just become like in the show ring, a progression of movements. And a lot of the very posh amateurs that came and thought that they knew stuff and were kind of equestrian statues, made the horses a little bit rigid and whatever, and rode without leg. And Oliveira used to be like, look at this. They are sitting there very pleased with themselves. They haven't brought anything to the horse. I always was very touched by that. I'm like, but the only thing I never understood is why he never told the people straight up. I don't think he had the patience for it. I don't think he had the tolerance for people that didn't have that instinct. I think he categorized people. That's my guess.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. If I'm hearing you right, it sounds like in order to be able to read the books and understand what they're saying, you have had to have the feeling experience first so that you can relate to the words. And that when you try to do the words first, you're coming from such a academic perspective that there's no feeling to attach, and you won't find the feeling because you're trying to match a feeling to an academic understanding.
It's whether it's that or matching a look. You look at a guy at a video and imitate him. Yeah, I've seen people who said, I want to be Oliveira, and they try to imitate the way he rides. And they don't know the small bits. So yes, there's interpretation. And it's not just Oliveira. I've seen people try and do Boucher from a book, and anyhow, it's not pretty. And it's it is one of those moments where direct transmission has to be part of the art form. It is part of the sport in the sense that they recycle the show horses, into the adult amateur and then into the young rider. There you wonder about the descending chain of training quality, for the horse and for the people. But it's always been dependent on that direct transmission, and the schools started that. When you had your lesson, the first thing you heard is keep your mouth shut and ride until you're told to do something or singled out. And that is because you will miss the moment, the feel moment, if you're too busy up there trying to get places, or I just want to do a flying change, just want to figure out passage to Piaff. And you can't figure out passage to Piaff in the right way if you don't have that feel in your up and down transition. And so they're all intertwined, all those desires to go further in a method that you pick up in the book or you pick up in your mind because you're going to a school in Portugal or Vienna or whatever, and you want to come out of there in 2 weeks having done all these movements. You're disconnected because you're not connecting it from the feel part. You're not understanding where the horse is placing you necessarily. Swan was a great guy to have in the lesson because he'd get you in that position, and you could ask him afterwards, or the horse would teach you why you had to circle that way to get your shoulder in better, to get your half pass off the corner faster. And that linkage is a show and tell tradition, always has been.
Mm.
That's why it's a feel thing.
Someone's asked about the size of the arenas that you rode in Portugal. They were small, weren't they?
The indoor school was small. It was La Guérinière size. It was a little bit narrower than the small dressage arena. And it was a challenge, particularly when you ended up with 8 stallions nose to tail, and the person behind was lagging. You had to adjust your circle to avoid collisions. And, there was always pairs of horses that didn't like each other that would try and, oh, look, it's an amateur that doesn't have an inside leg. I'll shoot across and jump on my hated foe. So we had some interesting moments. I always remember Dominique Barbier's stallion jumping on the back of Jonc when he was a baby. And the first thing I knew about it, I felt a tap on the back of my shoulder. It was the nose of the stallion. And Oliveira turned around and he was so angry. It was like, you didn't keep your distance. It wasn't really anger that the horses were playing around. It was the fact that the rider had not kept its distance. and you can't, it's very hard in that small arena.
Yeah.
So they when my mother put the big arena up top, which required dynamite blasting.
I was wondering when you said that it was on the side of a cliff.
Oh my God. And then they had to put cement and put a big tractor because it was so steep that when it was wet, the horses had no traction.
Oh,
But
wow.
the outdoor ring was very long, and often Mr. Oliveira would say with a young horse, Bettina, go up top and ride and, you know, do the boom boom trot. I meant posting trot, medium trot, just exercise the horse and get it out there. So 2 weeks I'd do boom boom.
Right.
That was his definition.
Um,
But Joan worked up there when the father would be in the indoor. And actually it was very interesting because when the father would go into doing stuff that was a little over the top but sloppy, and the gallery was like, wow, you know, he's such a genius and whatever. And it was kind of schlocky. It wasn't clean. I'd just go paddling up and watch Jean, who was very meticulous with the young horses and ride his horses. And it was interesting that the contrast. I mean, don't get me wrong, Mr. Oliveira, when he was in truth and spot on and doing his thing, was extraordinary, untouchable. But there were a lot of moments where he was like a car salesman. And I was like, as a child, I was like, oh, no, boring, read my book. And the minute that something true would come, there was like an aura that would just prickle and pull you in. And in that small arena, with the light on, that truth in his writing and truth in his art form and the opera, it was pretty spectacular. So it was evident when it was true and put on.
I think that's the case in many things, that when it's the real truth, it has such a different feel. It just makes you snap your head up and take a look.
Yeah, exactly. And it's unmistakable. And the sound of the horses, that's how I learned to operate on my ears so much. The sound of the horses was completely different, right down to the clinking on the bits and the cadence and all that. And one is attracted to it.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes you've got to kind of sort the ditterus from the truth, but the truth is worth taking the time to look for.
Well, and I think that's where I got places when I became a young professional with him, because he was pretty destructive to all the people who got to that stage. He didn't really support, even with his son, an outside career. It was all about his writing and supporting that. So I got away with that a lot longer for two reasons. The top reason is that meeting him as a child and being exposed to the quality of the school and the quality of the end result, but the kind of crazy fervor when things were just showing off and hot air. Basically, I got away, particularly as a teenager, with calling BS on him. And I would do it straight to his face. Wouldn't do it in front of people necessarily, but I would stop and I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. That's your thing. That's not why I'm here. And I really got a grudging respect from him, because, and I had nothing to lose because I didn't need to be up there. I had the link, you know. So I think that's interesting.
Well, and yeah, like you say, you had nothing to lose and you had seen him basically in all of the phases. So you could call him out. And I'm sure that there was a level of respect and appreciation from that, because I think people at that level because they can do the smoke and mirrors and the magic tricks that aren't really at the same level, that boundary of, wait a second, that's not the near absolute truth, is important to them. Someone who can actually call them out and know the difference.
Yeah, I think that to me it was because I learned from the horse's perspective. And what was so marvelous about Oliveira's training is that when you hit that spot, it was like the sweet spot of a tennis racket, but it was with all the emotions of the horse. The horse was gathered in and calm, energetic, eager, at ready. You know, you had all these things that are a little bit usually opposed and united. And it's unmistakable when you are in that spot of balance and that all that energy is staying in flux underneath you. And that it's not about cooperation or getting inside the emotions of the horse with your emotions. It's about being inside this endeavor all together. And so if the horses convinced me that that was the spot, I wanted to be there because that was the spot. And it was where, even small, I could feel comfortable and not afraid inside that amount of power, because you could turn it, you could move it, you could do anything. So if he got a little bit like, do this and that, and it pulled you out, first of all, I didn't feel safe as a small person with that. But also, it was too noisy. It was like the opera blaring from 4 speakers. Everything became too noisy. And it was already bad enough when he was in his shouting phase that you'd have his noise and that pressure, but that it was always centered around, it's like, the best way I would describe it is like the eye of the hurricane. You know, you have to fly through these winds, the push of your seat to get into it. But once you're in there, it's completely eerily calm. And then you can actually apply technique. Mm. Then it's the horse understands the technique. But if you have to then fly back out and there's a lot of noise and emotion, and for what? For impressing 3 people in a gallery that really don't know any different. You know, it's like, give me the 10 minutes I need to do it right. And so I got actually worse and worse. The last time I went on Swan, the horse he made me buy for $1, his personal horse. He made me piaffe for like an hour on the horse, and the horse wasn't straight, not straight in its incurvation. It wasn't even visual. It was just the spine, and he was just skewed. And we literally argued while I piaffed for an hour. And finally, at the end, he looked at me and he said, "You're a terrible girl, but you're right." Which is what he said often, that I was a terrible girl. I said, "You're only saying I'm terrible because I don't agree with you and I'm putting you on the spot and you know that it's wrong." So, and then I actually started writing him letters when he'd have complete mental breakdown about stuff. And no. So I'm not yet getting yelled at again. So I'd send a letter down and I would wait till I got the message that I had to come and ride.
Oh, while you were in Portugal, you write him letters.
Oh, well, I'd sit in my thing and I'd send it down with the groom in the early morning. And I would, mentally cross my arms and wait, I'm not coming down. I didn't make the effort and I'm not spending my money to just do dreck. And so then I would get in and he would grab my arm when I'd come in and fling my letter dramatically into the waste paper basket and say, "Now we'll ride." said, yeah, well, it'd be easier if we didn't have all these this emotion. But, that's who he was. That's who he was, and that's what the horses responded so well to in many ways, and sometimes not so well. I mean, it's a tool in many ways, that kind of overreaction. Tool to see if people will back off. It's a tool that can be projected to make horses that are recalcitrant go. And that energy that really has served me well, and understanding its power. But if you use it, it's like the dark side of the force. If you use it the wrong way, you become Darth Vader. You know, it's kind of scary that it was so strong that when he'd get off a young horse, smoke, turn his back to the horse's forehead would come and literally glue itself to the small of its back, and he'd be walking around gesticulating with his cigarette, stuff that young horses probably wouldn't go near. And the horse would have the ears locked sideways with the forehead into the energy of his back. It was just eerie, and it was like glue. So, you know, he could pressure the horses physically, to get beyond very quickly one stage to the other because of that. You know, it's a leverage point. And it could be a leverage point, or it can be a rape. Your choice. When you're that good and have that much in you. And it translated when he did his private exhibitions. I mean, I saw Tebaldi, or not the Tebaldi, the great soprano.
Mm-hmm.
She was invited. My mother got her there, and as a surprise for Oliveira, adored part of her voice. And it was just one of those moments. He was riding, and she comes in, and the salute, all of a sudden, everything came up, and I thought he was going to go a little bit into the crazy display thing. And he asked her to come in, and she said, I would like to sing for you. So she came in, and just the osmosis that happened completely drew that power back in instead of sending it zinging around to impress. And she started singing, he started riding. And, you know, I can only describe the magnetic poles of the energetics of their art form intertwining. It was like seeing energetic patterns in and out. Her voice would soar up, he would come underneath it and then soar back. It was amazing. It was three-dimensional. And she was just standing there. He was riding in a very sober way. But the energetics were so palpable. It was almost like in films where you see a sort of lightning streak that then dissipates. And then at the end, he turns and stops and bows, and she knelt to him. It was two artists, and she didn't know anything about this art form, anything about Oliveira. It was that powerful. She knelt into his art form, and he bowed into hers. And, that's what happened inside the horse and outside the horse. And it forgave the fact that the horses were pushed sometimes very hard. For me, you know, as Flotsam, I could feel that exchange. That's also feel.
Wow, that is fascinating to story. I didn't know. Is that where you got the inspiration to combine your art form with other performing artists?
No, I don't think it was that exactly, because it was, you know, Oliveira's choice, opera and the art form. for me, that came more with the study of the Japanese shibumi that I studied when I left Oliveira's, where you forgive your mistakes because you incorporate them in the art. And I think there was that notion of incorporating. You know, there's always a flaw in whatever you do. You make the flaw into a piece of art. And so I think it was more that. But yes, the dynamics or synergy that I saw there were it was intimate and it was between peers. And there was such respect and such love, passion for what they did, that it was the most powerful, quiet that I've ever experienced. And I had seen literally a year before an exhibition that was extraordinary. I mean, it was Oliveira interpreting opera like I've never seen him do. He was on his favorite horse, Levant, and at his peak, I think the horse was 7, and it was for Adlai Stevenson's sister, Buffy Stevenson, a whole retinue of diplomats and whatever's, and there we were. And we'd done our thing, and Oliveira came in very quietly and let loose to the death scene of Madame Butterfly, like I have never seen and probably never will see again energy, because the energetic strike off that he put in the horse, and the horse was magnificent and so strong-willed in the right way and strong-backed, and they were together. It really was there, the beyond centaur, because it wasn't really the togetherness, it was the togetherness into that music. And you know, it's very dramatic, and she's dying, and lover is yelling her name to stop her from killing herself. Butterfly. And you know, it's, and every time there was and he hadn't planned anything, there was just so much power in what he did. And the horse obviously could do the passades, and he did a moment where he said butterfly, he did the most extravagant maneuver corner to corner in that small ring of a very high, almost a poussade, but with no interruption at the canter, doing the bullfight reverse. And he did that 4 or 5 times on that very small thing to make it last with that longing cry of butterfly. And then obviously then she kills herself, and you have the gongs, and he went up in the air. I've never seen the horse jump that high. His head was leveled with the speakers. The horse had to have been, I used to jump 6 feet maybe. The horse had to have been 8 or 9 feet from a piaffe, from a virtual standstill. And then he landed in canter in place in that short arena. And then the gong goes again, and he whirled, went back, galloped up the center line, stopped, music, and backed up like that. So you felt the collapse in the death of the woman. It was 4 minutes. I was wrung out like a towel. It was first time the impact of such a ride hit me emotionally. I was strung out and wrung out at the same time. You were excited, fizzing internally, and you were exhausted. You just had been wrung out. It was extraordinary. Luckily, he had a fairly long vest, because I leaned over as he passed and said, "Mr. Oliveira, your fly is open." That was like the best antidote to artistry, is the fact that he did it all with his fly half open. Nobody noticed, because I mean, you didn't see it, but it was funny because when I did the movie, the first gallop across the island way in the water with Oso, he'd leapt about the first time when and tried to jump out of the little ripples. And I didn't realize it, but my fly had come down, and it was Kim Macy who came up and said, "You need to zip up." So these are the things that bring you down to earth. But it was extraordinary. It was extraordinary. So I came out of that formation more with presenting that unity with the horse, and then having moments like that. I had a couple of moments when I did exhibitions where it came through. But I learned to interpret from the music the way Oliveira did, so that you really have to be aware of the horse, aware of your technique, but then let it go, because you have to let the music guide you. And it's really fun because the horse feels that you're following that. And so there's no point of resistance. There's no horse that says, "Gee, I can feel you're planning a series of flying changes and I don't want to do them." And that's fabulous. That's, you know, the best compliment when a horse goes with you and hears the music through you. And you hear the music through the artist. When I started collaborating with Ethel, it took probably 3 or 4 goes before I heard their interactions and how they adjusted to each other, and then how to filter the horse in between that or off of that. And that becomes a game. There's your collaboration. But the horse has to, you can't be in a fight. You can't be in a technical fight. You can't worry about it. You can't say to yourself, "Gee, in that corner, I've sort of lost the inside hind." You just find it again, and while you're getting on to the next bit of the music. And that too is learning through feel. And Oliveira was the master for that. I've not seen anyone else do it that way. Let the music guide you.
Someone's asked if you could distill the talent given to you from Mr. Oliveira that you could pass on to the horse world, what would it be?
The what? The talent?
The talent that given to you by Mr. Oliveira that you could pass on to the horse world. In other words, what would you through him?
Well, I need a clarification, because talent is innate. So Oliveira didn't pass on talent. He trained talent, but he passed on, you can pick, theory, expression. So is that what I'm supposed to answer?
I'm not sure, but I think we can refine this question to how would we put it? What is it that you learned through your experience, through Mr. Oliveira, through your lifetime? If you were to tell someone what would be your words of wisdom to someone else that's coming along now?
Well, since I am coaching the gal who's taken over Oso a bit that way, it depends on what you're looking for. Oliveira knew that I really wasn't looking for anything in the horses other than that connection. I rode his horses towards obviously what he wanted and what he was doing. He was always very respectful. Like, I would choose very different music to ride to when I became an adult. And he was interested in seeing how I rode my horse, or even his horses, but mostly my horses when they were there, to that music. So I would say what I came away from is, and what I try to urge my few students that aspire to artistry with horses, is really two things. One, respect the clarity of the technique, because without that, you cannot get to the second thing, which is the individual nature of your expression and of the horse. And I think that respect of those things and that nurturing of those things is really what I came away, the best that I got from Mr.
Mm.
Good question.
Yeah. I have another question, but it goes more into technique, and I think we've been,
I'm okay with it.
Okay, great. So how do you develop the back and top line of a horse in the French system of dressage? She says, I have recently started studying the system and have found my horse's back muscles to have diminished. Perhaps I don't understand the training properly.
Well, first of all, Mr. Oliveira is not the French system of dressage. He incorporated the Marialva of his youth. He incorporated the French classical, La Guérinière, and then the non-classical, which is Boucher. So he made a graft that was entirely his Portuguese thing. But to get back to developing the back, be careful of systems that are didactic about pole position rather than looking for permeability, and didactic about elevation of the pole and flexions, direct flexions that are too static, because that blocks the back. What is fascinating about the French system is you can get to the same releases as the more modern stretching German French cavalry stretching. So part of it is if you are seeing a diminishing in your horse's back, whether it's La Guérinière that's contracted too much, the pole position held too didactically as through the hand. And so you see contractions, even though the horse can piaffe, the horse piaffes very quickly, and it becomes disassociative. In other words, the piaffe serves no purpose to round up and elevate the canter. And then the other system, presumably Boucher based, if it's too didactic about four legs, break down the resistance, and then start your locomotion by a reaction up and back in the neck, then the back stops working. You get a sort of false energy. You get very quick, like I said, you can get a horse to piaffe and passage. It looks a bit hollow and it's quick, and the horse is a little bit braced in his muscles. Same thing with the techniques where you hold the front end and then the nose is slightly out and you post the trot, and then the front end gets very loose, but the hind end gets left a little behind like a sausage dog. I think it's a question of degrees. It's not a question of French. But I developed the horse's back end by using some of the La Guérinière techniques of stepping the hind feet through and asking the horse to round and then release a little bit. So the horse learns to bascule between the hand and leg. But a lot of it is your lateral work has to be incurved and then straight on the bending line. You have to be able to put the lateral work within the bending line on the straight line without losing the balance and the mass of the outside shoulder and outside rib cage going through your leg. And you have to do a hell of a lot of transitions, down transition, keeping the horse ahead of the leg, and then the up transition, keeping the horse under the hand. It's what I was talking about when I said I prepare the horses at the walk and at the halt when I bring the hind legs a little under the mass, and then I bring the horse a little under the hand. You literally walk a little bit the back feet up, and then you release the neck and the back comes up, and off you go. Now the back doesn't come up a huge amount because horses don't have a great deal of flexibility, but it is going a little bit sideways, a little bit between the aids, and a little bit rocking back. You can only do a few rein back steps, put the horse behind the hand, and then push the horse a little ahead of the leg and strike off at the canter, let the neck down, bring back a little bit up. And by down, I just say mean vertical to the chest, and then change the depth of the base of the neck. Bring the base of the neck a little bit shorter. Try to balance that with the back feet, and bring the base of the neck a little out. Sort of like putting expression, like if you play the piano, you put different touches, do different exercises for the speed of your fingers, that sort of thing. That's how I do the back. I don't cheat, even though I could do it better than most. I don't put an early piaffe just because I'm having trouble with the canter. I don't use flexion. I don't like either with la guérinière or boucher. I don't believe in a transition that is the energy is done through the base of the neck and overloading the hind end, and in the case of bad boucher, leaving the hind end strung out behind. In the case of bad la guérinière, over engaging and losing the hock separation and the dynamics through the stifle. So those are the dangers. So again, you have to define what technique you're using. And the French technique, they're not the same. Americans talk about classical technique and they slam boucher and la guérinière together. Like, no, separate, opposed, not together.
Actually, that would be for another time a very interesting discussion of the differences between Le Guérinière and Boucher, and so that people have a better understanding. Because I think you're right. I think we tend to smush everything together and then it gets blurred and we don't know the differences.
Yeah, and it was not together time-wise either. There was a long period of time between those two guys. But you know, often people say, well, I do boucher because they do flexions, and sometimes they don't understand the flexions they do or why they're doing it. But at the same time, they're working on shoulder ins. And I'm like, well, then you're not doing boucher, because boucher didn't do shoulder ins on purpose. So there's a lot of dynamics. But what I learned with Oliveira was to keep the horse within a certain balance. And I, look at the first horses, a lot of horses he trained at the old school with Boucher Première Manière grafted on the more Marie-Alva collection. And, I don't know that I would have been that interested in learning that. So it was just as well I was a peanut. And I think you have to decide the look of your back. And yes, if you see that the back muscles are not well, you need to go back to whoever taught you that first and say, am I doing it right? Because this isn't working right now for me. And then before you throw out the baby with the bathwater, check and see if your expression of the technical components is good. Before you say the technique is wrong or the method is wrong. That I learned very quickly. And I never had any doubts with Mr. Oliveira. Good. I don't like this. I don't like this feel. Horse is spitting out the bits. I have to do too much effet ensemble. And he's like, it's a phase. That was his answer. It's a phase of development. You'll see. And he was always came out with a cloud of dust, impeccable. But we don't have.
Well, it's okay. I was just wondering, if people wanted to learn more about the Oliveira method, where could they go, or who could they study, or how could they?
Well, there is no method. There is a methodology that he grafted together. He grafted two opposing methodologies. But as João Oliveira said, there is no method. There's only Mr. Oliveira. Why? Because we are lesser mortals, and also we pick and choose. What I learned from Mr. Oliveira, and that certain stage was not the same thing as Swan or Christian Farnier, who was the wonderful rider student before me, had mastered certain things about how he used his legs like nobody's business. Just was such a talent. I think you have to go and look at the people that worked with him that have developed over their career a part or a certain look that goes with what you admire when you look at Oliveira's writing. I've been teaching in America, so most of what I taught was la guerinière and classical form and position and how the position holds the contact and how to collect horses on the leg. Because America during my era was so poor with that, whether you showed or you didn't. If you don't have that clear understanding, how are you going to understand how Oliveira grafted Boucher on that? There are two techniques that you have to study separately. You have to understand the purpose and you have to understand the result. The best way is to look at the horses that are produced. If you like the look of the muscle structure and the way they are and the approach of the rider, then you study with that student. And there are many students that went away with one piece that they really thought was that ideal. And that's okay. That's part of being influenced. There are several students still teaching that are much older in Europe. Belge gal. There's a couple of French people that worked with him. They're more private. There's several people still in Portugal that had worked with him. The current head of the Portuguese school, João Pedro Rodrigues, worked with him. I think you have to go and look at the work, at least in picture form, and see the results. Some people got so in love with the Boucher part, they left the la guerinière and vice versa. And some people were much more into the discretion of riding, but weren't terribly physical. And some people were just physical and didn't have a lot of grounding in technique. It's one man cannot create students very in large quantities, and Mr. Oliveira actually didn't have many students that he took on as projects that way. We weren't trained to train others. In fact, Oliveira was a bit like Louis XIV. After me, the deluge. I don't think he really cared that this went on. It's a long answer, but it's the best answer I can give. And many of the students have adapted it and gone on in different ways. Like I had to adapt some of the teachings because Americans like to go out and forward, whether it's in the show ring or galloping cross country. So you have to bring in baby collection because, that obsession with, oh my God, I've collected, quick, let's go galloping off and go jump something. It's a bit of a cultural thing. And the dangers of collection, very, very powerful collection on the spot. You have to filter all that power. So find someone that has that feel. Because Oliveira, when he showed me how to work the reins, it was upward, the fingers upward and rolled over and release. And a lot of people have interpreted it as play with fingers, which drive me completely batty. So, look at Oliveira's books. The first ones had a certain look, the middle ones had a certain look, the end ones had a certain look because he evolved in his career. Pick a person that matches the time period that you like.
Yeah.
That's also part of it. I didn't like his last couple of years. I told him so, and he said, "Oh, I'm an old man. I can't ride uphill. It's an experiment in deep boucher." And it was, and I learned some really interesting techniques. But the horses were much heavier to the leg, and they were spitting out the bits, and to constantly interrupt and calibrate, and you never really felt that the hip angle went down. But it was hard to judge because both horses he had some mechanical failures in locomotion. So it was interesting, but it wasn't what I wanted to study. And frankly, that's why I stopped going there the last 2 years of his life. Just it wasn't what I wanted to ride.
So just to kind of so you were in Portugal through your teenage years, and then you came to the United States. How old were you when you came to the United States?
14 and a half.
And that's when you went to boarding school? And
yeah, and I was trotted out again, monkey with hat. I was trotted out every single clinic at Potomac Horse Center. Oh my God, my horse was trotted out. It drove me absolutely mad. In Connecticut too. That's how I ended up. And I had to do the whole routine with the one tempi changes and the passage and transition from passage to one tempis and back. I mean, talk about teenager with attitude. I was so grumpy. And then the horse was taken from me to educate every single judge person that showed that couldn't do one tempis. I mean, that is a sainthood for that horse.
was that
And
Jean?
for me, for tolerating the fact that I had to fix his mouth and his temper after that. I just remember Potomac and I cringe.
Oh, dear.
There were some marvelous things I saw, but yeah, I ended up doing that. And then my holidays were then eaten up by going to Portugal and working. And then at 16 and a half, I bought Vibrato. That horse was like on amphetamines and angry mouth, angry attitude at being poked with spurs. Very interesting horse. And I didn't realize it. He dumped Balba, the head of the Portuguese school, and Michel Henriquet on the ground. So it was kind of a transition there. I asked to buy him. And I think I've told you that story that Oliveira had a bet on with Swan after he sold me the horse that I wasn't going to be able to train him. And Swan, knowing my character, took the bet. And I found out 3 years later that going up the hill, that there was a bet on. Jean took me out to a very good dinner on the money he made.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Bettina, we've been at this for about 2 hours, and we've finally gotten you to the United States, which I just love hearing your recounting of your life, because I think this puts into perspective so much more so. At least I've known you for I don't know how many years, but again, it's another level and another depth of understanding of everything you've been through to be the Equestrian that you are today. And we so often don't realize the depth to which someone has trained and ridden and experienced and taught and studied when you see them only in a small slice of life at a clinic or in a lesson. And for me, I mean, I knew a little of this history, but it just it puts so much more perspective on it that
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I just so appreciate you taking the time to share this.
No, I mean, it's, I'm fairly discreet about it because it was a gift to me, an unlooked for gift, but I just call it my apprenticeship, but it was 15 years. And, I didn't really think that I would get there. I came out thinking if I can keep all all the horses I ride are a little lighter, happier, and maybe piaff a bit. Wow, that's good. So, you know, I didn't have a lot of pretension when you met me, I was a little bit already before that. When I got to Oxford, I was a little bit a fish out of water because everything I learned was out of context. The riding tradition, the type of horse, the mentality of how to break in. It's a bit what the Western guys encounter when they sort of interact with dressage people. It's the same sort of, okay, we're supposed to be speaking English, but we don't really speak the same language. So, and I never really thought I'd make a career out of it. I went and trained a couple of horses in Biarritz when I was living there for a few months. And Manuel Eleno, who's a student of Oliveira's, went back apparently to Portugal and said, oh, your student did a great job with my horses. They won the European Championships. The other one's Saint-Georges champion. Nice job. And I didn't hear about it. I arrived at Oliveira's and 2 days later he goes, oh, by the way, Manuel Eleno was here and he said, you know, you did a great job with the horses. And I suddenly looked at him and said, do you think I could do this for a living? And he looked at me and he said, well, why would you do it for a living? You know, you marry a beautiful man, have beautiful children, ride beautifully beautiful horses, and think beautiful thoughts. That, you know, so none of this is directed, but there's a reason why you have the time and the meeting to have this apprenticeship. And there was a reason why when I came to America, I met up immediately with sponsors of the musical art and painters and people like that. And that's when I studied the shibumi, was to get over the notion of being instantly good, instantly perfect, because I was holding too much tension. Oliveira was criticizing my picture, saying it's beautiful everywhere, but look at your neck. There's tension in your neck. And I'm like, that's because I'm trying not to breathe and messing up. I'm like, I gotta get over this before. And you know, I had ulcerative colitis. Yeah. Because of the stresses at home and also the stresses from that. And so, you know, apprenticeship is one thing, perfection is another. And beware of perfection, because then you start looking at the horses and it's not so natural. And then everything you do becomes not so natural. So, you know, you have to balance that. Yeah. That's art. Yeah. I wish always, and this is my parting thought to you, I wish always that I'd had the ego and the guts of Mr. Oliveira, that when I screwed up royally, that I could just pretend that I'd done it on purpose. That was, you want to know my takeaway? I never had the guts to do that. I was always, or the brashness, I was always like, oh, that didn't work. I'm going to have to work on that. And if I incorporate it again, it's going to have to be worked on. Oh. I never said I meant to do that. Oh. That's why I never used the label master. If I master myself, that's already good enough for this lifetime. I'm so grateful that I wasn't burned. I only have a talent that was honed, and I honed it for the horses and for myself and for the people who thought that it was beautiful. The people who thought that it was beautiful became my students. End of story. It should be like that. It should be as natural as that, like the choice of a horse. I hate chestnuts. 3 of my best teachers were chestnuts. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So, but there's something there. There's something there. Just like I remember meeting you and I was like, there's something there. You won that pony. Yes. Carol Baker. Oh, shoot. I forgot his name. I have his picture here. Yeah. Shane. That's Shane. Right. Was that Carol Baker? No, that Martha Gansudis owned Shane. So that was later, but I saw you teach down at Carol Baker's Pony Club. Oh, yes. You were teaching originally at Mounted Troop, and she asked you to come and teach, and she asked me to come watch you teach.
Oh, I didn't realize that or remember that.
And I didn't know anything about Sally Swift except she had a upper level student in Europe that worked with Oliveira, and I admired the girl. I thought she was very poised and with her horse. I thought, I've got Sally Swift. And then I traced the chain back and did my first exhibition with Mimi with Sally for her senior instructor.
Yeah.
You were the conduit of good teaching. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right, I'm going to let you go because it's been 2 hours and I don't want to exhaust you, because I'm going to ask you if you will come back and do this again.
Always, as long as I am not sitting there having waves of nausea from the chemo, I would be delighted.
Well, what I'll do is we'll be in touch, and I'll make sure it's a time where your energy has been quite good. I've been kind of trying to keep an eye on you, and your energy seems to have been quite good.
Better living through chemistry. But I always like talking about these memories. They revive the energy.
Yeah.
And that's what good writing is about. If you can talk about it and you can get that energetics, it's fantastic. If you can share it with like-minded people, it's even more fun. So you see, I'm stuck in the winter and in a medical condition where I'm not allowed to see people. So this is the next best thing. In fact, it's better because I don't have to clean up after a visit. Win-win situation.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's always fantastic to to see you and spend time. I so appreciate you doing this for me.
All right, my friend. Take good care, and thank you all who came and listened, and thank you for your good wishes.
Yeah. Okay. Bye. Bye, everybody.